Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast where a behavioral scientist examines what it's like to live a humorous life. Glimpse into the lives of the funniest people in entertainment, business, and science as your host, Dr. Peter McGraw, explores their habits, motivations, and secrets to success. Get ready to fire up your brain and your funny bone. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast that looks at the lives of funny people. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Adam Barsky. Adam is an associate professor of management at the University of Melbourne. His research focuses on how people use emotions to make ethical judgments and decisions. And more recently, he has been studying what makes things funny. He's the co-founder and CEO of a social enterprise dedicated to helping ethical consumers make more informed and impactful choices. He's also a collaborator and friend. Welcome, Adam.
Thanks. Welcome. Thanks, Pete.
So, Adam, if you weren't working as an academic or the CEO and co-founder of a social enterprise,
right,
what would you be doing?
So I don't get to use that one as my
you can't.
Alternative. Yeah. Right.
So if you can't be doing the things that you're doing,
right,
what would you be doing?
Right. Okay, gotcha. Well, that's a tough one. I think probably a professional traveler, sort of a going different places and
You'd be a blogger.
A blogger, right? That's right. It's like experiencing their cultures and finding ways to talk interestingly about them. So yes, a blogger. I think that's it. An influencer, Instagram influencer. That's my next.
You don't do much social media.
I really don't. No, that's.
I'm impressed by that.
I think I'm maybe a little old for social media.
Everybody's on Instagram.
I know.
It's amazing.
I know. You know what? I feel like there was a while back where I was like, when Facebook was still kind of cool.
Fun.
Yeah, fun. Where I would have like little quips that I would put on there, and it was kind of a little bit satisfying. You'd like say a little funny thing, but I don't know. I just feel like the public nature of the conversations don't really appeal to me. It's like
this one.
Well, no, this is a private conversation that's being made public.
Right.
I guess no, that's exactly right. This is exactly what social media is.
So for the listener, it wasn't clear Adam was like gung-ho to do this podcast.
Right.
And I kind of roped him into it. So
right. I like to fly under the radar. That's that's been sort of my thing for a long time. As long as people aren't paying too much attention, I'm doing all right.
You're not a look at me kind of guy.
No, not in public situations.
Yeah.
But in sort of a room full of people, then I'm like, please look at me.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So, what's interesting is you are a very funny writer.
Right. Okay.
I actually think you're a funnier writer.
Right.
Than you are talker.
Okay.
Like, of all the people I email with regularly.
Yeah.
You're in the top 3 in terms of funniness.
Right. Well, I think I make a real effort to make casual conversation funny.
Mm-hmm.
Like instrumental conversation funny. So when we're trying to figure something out, when I've got to make plans with somebody over text, or just something that would normally be just the banal thing that you'd have to do,
mm-hmm.
That's where I actually try to be funny. So,
why?
Because I feel like those things are inherently boring for both people who are involved, and so that can be a little bit more entertaining, then it's as opposed to trying to make a night out really funny, which everybody is expecting. You want to have a good time. It's like where boringness exists. That's where you would like to just insert little jokes to make the other person feel like the situation is a little less boring.
Yeah, well, you're good at it.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Thanks,
I notice
man.
it.
Yeah. It's unprofessional though, so I do this in professional context as well. So I like group emails to my department as well. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's like really, it's not.
Yeah.
I have no filter though, unfortunately.
It's so interesting you say this because, so I'm a little the same way, and I have a particular perspective about relationships,
right,
and the value of conversation.
Yeah. Okay.
So whether it be just friends, professional, dating, and beyond, I'm always on the lookout for good conversation. And that doesn't have to be oral, it could be written also. And the reason is really that's what you're doing with the person the most. That is, like, you may share similar, you may both be interested in mountain biking, you both might like movies or travel or whatever. But most of the time,
Right.
you're just sitting around talking.
Right. I know. I tell you. I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, I've been married for 10 years to a woman who I have almost no shared interests, but we have great conversation.
Right.
So it's like that's it. That sustains it, and I'm happy with that.
I think that's something. It's so funny. Like, so if you get on a dating app, you
Yeah.
list all your interests.
Right.
Live music.
Right.
You know, this and that and all
Yeah,
these
yeah.
kind of things. And people make decisions based upon, like, make big decisions
Yeah.
about whether they are willing to meet someone
right.
or not based upon those interests.
Right.
And what I think is interesting is some of my more enjoyable relationships in life
Right.
are with women who we didn't have a ton of overlapping interests.
Yeah.
But boy, could we have a good, fun conversation.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's because it's easier to imagine yourself doing something with somebody than having a good conversation with them.
Yes.
It's
And-
like
yes.
it's like I could imagine going skiing with somebody and like we're on the slopes together, but it's like sitting down and just like laughing together or having a good conversation about stuff. That's tough to picture.
And you know what I have done when I'm on the apps is I will do phone calls sometimes. And so
Interesting.
because I mean, like that forces a conversation in
Right.
a way that you're uninfluenced by looks and
Right.
the context and
Right.
so on.
What's funny, I remember my dad saying something one time. I think I was in France with him when I was like 15, and it stuck with me my whole life. We were at a museum, I think Musée d'Orsay, and we were looking at a painting, and I said, "This is boring," and he said, "It's not boring. You're boring."
Yes, yeah.
I'm like, okay.
How old were you?
I was like 15.
Yeah, right.
He's like, you don't know enough about this
For it to be interesting.
for it to be interesting.
Wow, that's
And I was like, and he's like, you're not curious about it. And therefore there is plenty that would be interesting about this. The context, the history, the feelings that it evokes in me or other people. There's lots of things that you could find interesting about this, but you're boring. And so, in fact, that led to a whole way of art appreciation that my wife and I have, which is that we go to museums and we try to come up with funny titles for the paintings.
Oh, I've done this with you.
Yeah, we've done this together.
Yes.
Yeah, it's hilarious. It's a great way to appreciate art.
Yes.
And it just forces you to tell a story and understand and think about what it is. I mean, that's not for everybody. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing this for everyone, but for us, it's a great way of it forces you to be interesting rather than making the painting do all the work.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think the same thing's true in conversation. Like you sort of, everybody has something interesting to say, and everybody has a sort of, there's even the most banal stories have sort of moments of interest and something that could be funny and something that could be played off of. But it's up to you to pay attention.
Yes.
And work off of that and think about it. So that's, I think it's the same way. I mean, I think there's certain people you're definitely going to have better conversations with, but I think there's interesting bits in everything.
Yeah, and it's sort of this idea of, so in filmmaking, there's, as you know, I'm doing some research on editing.
Mm-hmm.
There's sort of two forms of editing, which is one is structural and one is stylistic.
Yeah.
And so, for example, you might have a film that's beautifully edited from a structural standpoint. That is, like, it puts together a story in a very interesting way.
Yeah.
And a lot of like dramas are structurally edited very, very strongly.
Okay.
Stylistically is more aesthetics, the visual of it.
Right.
So the movie that comes to mind, so a lot of action movies they're light on story,
Yeah.
they're light on structure, but they're very strong on style.
Right. Okay.
And so for example, is it Matthew Vaughn? I forget who did it. I think it is. He did the movie Baby Driver.
Right.
Not a terribly good story, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
but it's very fun to watch.
Totally.
It's highly stylized and it's
And the music's wonderful.
Yes,
Yeah.
and so I think about conversation
Yeah.
as having those two elements.
Right.
And so because really what you're doing with a conversation is you're editing. You're deciding what goes in, what goes out.
Right.
You know what I mean? You're deciding the order of things and so on. And so, a podcast can have the same thing.
Right.
Which is just what are the beats and does it move and does it sizzle
Right.
a little bit versus like what you were just talking about, this idea of you're boring
Right.
versus this is boring is structurally
Right.
a very interesting thing.
Right.
Now you can say it in a way that's pops or doesn't, and so for the listener listening, you can, I think some podcasts are a little better on style and some are better on structure or substance. And
it's like peppering the emotional sort of flow throughout the content that's being delivered. So we could be talking about something that's interesting from a content perspective, but it's actually not very funny, or it's not very interesting to listen to because we talk in a monotone or whatever. Yeah,
that's exactly right.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay.
So what it sounds like to me is that there are times where you're trying to add style to something that the structure of it is fixed.
Exactly, that's right.
Email to your faculty, or you telling me that you're coming to town.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Exactly.
So I want to back up and get back to your question about your travel blogging.
Right. Okay. Right.
So why that?
Well, I think it combines the things I like to do.
By the way, Adam keeps pondering these ideas off in the distance and not talking into the microphone.
Right. Well, usually what I'd be doing is I'd be rubbing my goatee, but I feel like that's going to create a crackle. So I'm having to find other nervous tics that I can do. I was actually, I remember I wrote like a travel blog before that was a thing, before there was like social media.
On AOL?
It was called Travelog.com. It was like way back when I first started doing some serious traveling. And I remember thinking, this is a really good way of telling a story. Like, it's like a way of writing a funny story but the content is all provided to you by your experiences, which I guess is just life in general. Mm-hmm. But, so I really enjoy creative writing. And, when I get the opportunity to do something, but I have a lot of trouble making up stories. So I tried to like write a fictional story at one point, and it just was like, there was a little bit that I could do, and I got about 30 or 40 pages into it. And I really enjoyed that process, but it was just like pulling teeth. But when I'm able to write about my own experiences or the experiences of others, so I really enjoy writing. Like, not enjoyed, maybe this is a weird way to say this, but I wrote the eulogy for my mother and for my father and the best man speech for a couple of different friends. Mm-hmm. So I always write these things ahead of time. And when I do that, there's a real sense of I don't know, personal flow and connection to the stuff that's being written, and it gives me an opportunity to sort of do that creative writing, but about something that's real.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're look, there's a reason you're an academic, right? Because you're writing about something that at least you believe is real.
Right, exactly. But that I really struggle with. I really, I don't find the writing of the academic writing very enjoyable.
Okay.
I do it because it's my job. But I don't, for some reason, you would think that would be the thing that I would like to write. But the abstraction from reality that's required for academic writing, I find to be very difficult to overcome.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's the really concrete experiences that we have, and finding ways to articulate those in a interesting or funny way is something that I think, if I had my druthers, that's what I would be doing, and traveling, and this provides you all these kinds of experiences and context by which
it seeds in the same way that doing a best man speech or a eulogy is seeded by your experiences with the person.
That's right.
Okay, so you're not a travel blogger, you're an academic, and you're really more than a professor, you're an entrepreneur. Yes, you teach management, but now you're living it. So you've launched your own business.
That's right, and that's been a really interesting experience. Learning, and over the last couple of years, I started a social enterprise. I also took over the social entrepreneurship subject in my faculty, so I teach social entrepreneurship, which was great. It's actually the class I learned the most from. So when I first got the class, I thought, I don't really know much about social entrepreneurship as an academic subject. So I got like 10, 12 guest speakers to come in, and I learned everything. So it was fabulous. I was like, this class is great. I mean, I'm teaching it, but I'm really enjoying it. And so, to really learn how to try to create something, and not just an enterprise, a business, but something that has a social outcome as well, and to try to balance those two demands in practice has been an incredibly interesting and very difficult experience. So I've got a partner. His name's Adam Diab. He's the CEO of our little enterprise, and it's been years of just really trying to figure something out that's just a complicated problem. And
what is the problem? So tell the listener what exactly you guys are doing.
Well, part of the problem is figuring out what the problem is exactly, right? So there's a series of problems at a very high level. The problem is the lack of consumer engagement with the choices that we make on a day-to-day basis. So some of us think about the eggs that we buy. We want free-range eggs, or maybe we try to buy organic food, or maybe we try to buy clothes that aren't.
Or you might bike instead of driving to work.
Exactly. You might try to make some choices that are good for society, but really, like, it's very difficult when you move outside of some of the very basic consumer goods to start making conscious, ethical choices. So if you wanted to have the best or the most ethical bank, or the most ethical electric company, or the most ethical mobile phone company, how would you make that choice? And how would you even know which one was better or worse? And then if you were able to make that choice, even if you did make a choice, would that choice have any impact?
Yeah, this is the classic alternative, which is that a lot of people who behave ethically, their consumption is designed to make the world a better place. The primary benefit is that it helps them feel okay, but it has very little effect on a big world. Right. With 9 billion people, whether you recycle or not has little effect. And so it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but if you want there to be greater reach, you're just limited as an individual.
Totally. You're limited as an individual, but primarily because your actions are so individualized. And because we haven't collectivized as consumers. So there isn't the way that employees did in the industrial relations movements and said, okay, as an employee, I can quit, but that's not going to change the working conditions around here. The only thing that's going to make a difference is if we work together as employees, collectivize our labor, and say we're not going to take these conditions, right? Because otherwise the power differential is so great between the companies and the individual employees. And the same thing is true as consumers. We feel as disempowered as consumers now as probably an employee did pre the union movement. In a factory, who's like, listen, this sucks, but what am I going to do? Like, it doesn't matter what I do because they'll just hire somebody else, right? And so what we realized what was really missing from what we believe is a real latent desire within the populace to engage in conscious consumption is a platform by which that can be made effective. So we're calling it sort of impact procurement, so that
you are such an academic.
But the idea is that the things that you buy, especially the services that you use, that the choices that you make can have an impact, but they have an impact only under certain conditions. And those conditions, at the very minimum, are that you have good information about the companies and the differences between them, and that when you do make a choice, that information is then communicated back to the companies and collectivized with other individuals who are making similar choices. And the idea is to then create a marketplace where we can create financial pressure on organizations to be better citizens, to give more back to the community, to make better environmental choices, so that community investment or corporate social responsibility moves from being a cost to organizations to being something that they need to do
as a feature that you use to differentiate yourself from other companies.
Exactly. And they do that right now. Companies do a lot of marketing of some of their behaviors. So you could say, if you look at the all kinds of companies are doing this now and trying to become advocates.
We donate money to this. Exactly. We recycle our waste. This kind of.
But primarily, what we're finding is that, and what the research suggests, is that companies are spending more money on the marketing of these activities than the activities themselves.
I see.
Right. So they're just simply and really, how can you as a consumer differentiate between a bank that says they give X amount of money to homeless and another bank who says they have carbon neutral activities? Like, how do you decide between those two things? And so because the information is so distributed and not made available to you in any sort of consolidated form as a consumer, you can't really differentiate. You don't really know who's better than who. And so that information, that transparency doesn't exist, which disempowers the individual from being able to make conscious choices. And then when you do make a choice, it doesn't matter because there's no collectivization of those choices. So what we've been doing is trying to create both an index, we call it the Social Footprint Index, which aggregates or creates an index of corporate social performance across a number of dimensions. We've started with corporate community investment, so how much companies give back to the community, and ranking companies within an industry, so looking at
all the banks in Australia.
Exactly. All the banks in Australia, all the electric companies in Australia, all the insurance companies in Australia. So each one within their industry gets ranked against each other in terms of how much they give back philanthropically, their how much they spend on social programs, and so forth. And so we have a criteria that we use to include or exclude companies. And so you get a ranking within each industry, and then you get within the platform you can make choices about sort of who you would like to use instead of your current provider. And that gives you both the opportunity to increase your sort of social footprint, which we give you a score, but also have that information then communicated back to organizations. So when you make that choice, it tweets to both companies saying,
you've been dropped, you've been hired.
Yeah, exactly. I went from...
You've been fired, you've been hired.
Exactly. To this company because they give more back to the community. And also it collectivizes those decisions into a report that we give back to companies and be able to say, this is how much money, this is how many consumers you lost. And this is the financial impact to you of losing those consumers. And so it is beholden on you to spend that money, at least that amount of money, to get those consumers back.
Yes, or not to lose more.
Or not to lose more. And so by spending more money on community investment or other social programs, you can then win those consumers back. And that creates a naturalistic marketplace by which companies now compete to be better citizens. But what that requires is a really engaged populace. So we've been working now trying to create
you got to feed this thing.
Exactly. You got to feed this thing with people. You got to feed this thing with people who care. And so we created the platform. It's called myfootprint.co. You can go and visit it now and see what it looks like. But really, and this is one of the problems of not being a big social media guy, is, I don't know.
You need to promote it.
You need to promote it. And it comes down, like everything else, it comes down to marketing.
I know.
And it is so hard to market a complex idea.
Yeah, look, you just took 10 minutes to explain this to me.
I know, and this is it. What's the 5-second pitch? I don't know. This is the problem.
So okay, I want to make sure I understand this right. So I'm going to try to translate this into non-managerial speak for a second. So there's a group of people in the world who care about the purchases that they make, don't make the world worse, and if that's possible, to make the world better.
Right.
People are very conscious of doing this with their consumable goods, the things that they can hold on to, the fruit that they buy and the cars that they drive, etc. They don't do this very well for services because services is a little bit of a black box. And so it's sort of hard to see, and especially to see the competition among the service providers. Myfootprint.co gives you that information, removes the friction of changing, because you folks facilitate the change.
Well, at the moment, that's sort of the next step.
Step. Okay.
The next step. At the moment, you just register your change, but we're going in that direction.
And then what happens is it bands people together, so you get this sort of unionizing of consumers to have a real effect on the marketplace, and then very publicly communicates that who the winners are and who the losers are, who are the good banks and who are the bad banks.
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah. So it's a complex decision. I mean, luckily it's people who are involved who are likely to be your best
people who are customers, currently already activated, interested in this kind of thing.
But yeah, I get this. I teach marketing, and I teach the value of communicating value via marketing communications.
Yeah.
And yet I'm also terrible about it. Like, I like making things. I don't like promoting things.
Right.
And so I love making this podcast.
Yeah.
I am shit at promoting it.
Totally.
And I know.
Yeah. And it's most people. I mean, my wife, she had a business for a while. She did a company called Groomy, where she made these wonderful toiletry bags and accessories, designed them, manufactured them. And we're like, this is going to be a killer. I mean, there's nothing like it on the market in Australia at the time. It was really like cutting edge fashion design, everything. And it just came down to marketing.
Yeah.
And we were just like, she's just like, I just don't. It's not what I want to do. I don't want to be I don't want to be a marketer.
But yet, it's just as important as having a good.
It's how do you cut through the clutter?
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, look at fire fraud, right? Those guys, fire.
Oh yeah.
Literally had nothing. They had no idea, right?
They were good at promoting.
They just promoted it. It's fabulous.
Yeah. By the way, for those of you who have not seen, there's 2 documentaries about this fire festival, FYRE.
I watched one of them. It's enthralling.
Yeah, it's great. And I've watched both, and they're both
They're
good.
both very
actually
good. There's a
worth
Netflix
watching.
one and a
Hulu one.
A Hulu
yeah,
one.
and they're actually both worth watching.
Yeah.
And it's like the power of marketing.
It's
the
so
power of
fascinating.
evil marketing.
So yeah, okay. And one nice thing about you is you are a do-gooder, right? So it wasn't an arbitrary decision that you got into into social responsibility. But I want to tell a quick story about something that you did that had a profound effect on my life. Okay. So I am often, and you know this because you've known me for 10 years now, 9 years ago,
Force my friendship on you.
When you force your friendship on me. As someone who forces his friendship on people, I appreciate that. As an aside, so it's not just an inside joke. Adam's family lives in Colorado. Well, your brother's here. Your parents were here.
Yep.
Many years ago, you reached out to me. Hey, I'm Adam Barsky. I'm a professor at University of Melbourne. Can we get together for coffee? I'm here in town, blah, blah, blah. And I kind of, I don't know if you're like, all right. And so, I just was, I was just in work hell probably.
Yeah.
And I've gotten better at saying no to those things in any case. And then we became friends, and you hosted me for a trip to Melbourne during my first sabbatical, and then you've hosted me since then.
Yeah.
And you come back to family, and we started working together, and it's a fun, not super productive, but productive enough collaboration.
Yeah, it's as productive as any of my collaboration.
That's right. And at one point in time, we were out, and I was commenting on how your life as an academic is unlike many other people's lives as academics, which is that you truly have work-life balance. You have work-life balance in a way that I found that at times I find envious. I'm envious of. And it's not just because you work in Australia.
Right.
Like, I think you would have work-life balance if you worked in the United States, which is harder to do.
Yeah. Harder to do, but still possible.
But still possible.
Yeah.
And what you said to me, I don't know if you remember this, when you said to me, you said, well, Pete, if you start saying no to things with the goal of living a simpler life, one day your life will be simple.
Yeah. That's it.
Do you remember that?
I do remember. Yeah. I think if you make choices to make your life simpler,
eventually
your life will be simple.
It won't be right away.
Right.
But eventually your life will be simpler.
Yeah.
And that led me to think a lot about what I'm saying yes to, what I'm saying no to, why I'm saying yes to it, why I'm saying no to it, and so on, to be much more clear about those choices and what are their short-term and long-term effects on my happiness.
Yeah.
In terms of, living a good life, but a life that is not boring.
Right.
And yet, you launch this is a big, hairy, audacious thing.
Oh, man. Seriously. Unbelievable.
You've been working on it for years. Why did you do it then?
Well, I think when I think about academia and my life as an academic, which you're right, it has been like a sort of, people look at my life as an academic, and I think a lot of people feel the same way that you do. They're like, and part of it is being in Australia. We get a sabbatical every 3 years, and my teaching is very, very minimal. I teach on average about 2 weeks a year, and so I have a lot of free time, and I'm not super ambitious when it comes to like being a world famous academic.
That's fine, but you're a good academic. This is not, you're not Deadwood in the department.
I'm fine, but I'm not ambitious enough to be famous in that regard. But I think
which, as an aside, I think is a little bit of a sweet spot in academia.
It is. Well, here's what I would say, and I have trouble admitting this sometimes, but I don't really think that I was born to be an academic. I think I kind of fell into it, and I never have really liked it that much. I've always felt like the scientific pursuit is kind of, to really answer interesting questions, you can't do it the way that we do it, right? You have to answer these very narrow questions rigorously.
Yes.
Or you can answer really big, or you can talk to really big questions, but not in any sort of way, without any real rigor. And so,
so what Adam's referring to is the peer review process.
Exactly.
Which is, you're writing these 30-page papers, basically, and they have to go through often several rounds of anonymous review by very critical reviewers. The process takes typically years,
Yeah.
and the final outcome is usually not as provocative as the thing that you started out with.
Yeah.
And while it typically is correct, right? The ideas in papers are typically correct.
Yeah.
They're not often very.
They can't have much of an impact.
They don't exactly, and they're not read by other. They're not read by normal people and by the people who make decisions. And
I mean, the best papers that we publish. I mean, if I were to publish a paper in the very top journal in my field, and it was a big hit, it's still possible that no single person outside of academia would ever read it.
It's possible,
and that would be considered like a huge win for me in my career. And I always felt like there was a disconnect between what we're doing, and everybody's talked about this, complained about this in academia, but this really hit me hard that I was like, it really felt like I was in this fantasy world. And so it was very hard for me to take it seriously as a profession. Because I'm like, really, we're just telling stories to each other? Really? And so,
I mean, in defense, generally the efforts are that you try to tell a correct story.
Totally.
That is that the story is a new story.
Right.
It's novel and it advances an idea.
Yeah.
But I get it.
But those ideas are, and the ideas that you're advancing are the stories that are being told within academia. Right? So it's the story of a particular kind of way of thinking about things. And so these aren't necessarily the relevance to the world. So when I think about my impact in the world, it has been very marginal. And so
probably your biggest impact in the world has been teaching students.
Totally, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And I enjoy that part of it. But the research part of it, which is really the main part of our job, is something that I found to be kind of I haven't gotten a lot of personal satisfaction out of. And because of that, if you don't like your job, you're going to spend most of your time trying to minimize the amount of time you spend doing your job, or the amount of time. So I've nailed not liking your job.
Okay.
Right. So if you don't like your job, I'm doing it the best. I'm the best at that.
Yeah, I like being an academic more than you do.
Exactly. And so people are like, oh my God, like what a great life. I'm like, yes, if you don't like your job, this is the way you ought to do it. But I'm like, it would be much better if you loved what you did. And then you'd be fine to spend lots of time doing it.
As an aside, I've always been a good enough teacher, but when I became a really good teacher was when I started making my teaching interesting to me, fun to me. Once I made teaching fun to me, everybody was happier. And so I agree with you.
That's absolutely true. And when I saw the impact you could have on students in being a teacher, I spent a lot of time trying to think about how to make the content interesting. I won the university award last year for the Teacher of the Year, and I was up for Australian Teacher of the Year last year. And so that's something that I have really cared about. But the question was, why have I started a social enterprise that takes up an inordinate amount of time? And there's really two reasons for that. One, I find it to be intrinsically interesting. Like, I really find the idea of trying to solve a real problem in the world that would make a difference to be something that's worth my time. Secondly, you learn. I've learned so much by trying to do something. I've been an academic for 15 years now. I know how to do it. It's like, but I never started a business before, and really from and this tech startup, like we're coming up with a computer platform and a marketplace. It's not even it's
not trivial. Yeah.
It's not trivial, and it's not something I knew anything about.
Yeah, it's not like the obvious business would be what I do. You write a book, you do consulting, you do professional speaking, etc. Right?
Yeah. And
that's leveraging your existing skill set and so on.
And what did leverage so part of this problem is data collection and data analysis. And how do we get this data? How do we figure it out? How do we consolidate it and make it understandable to people? And so it has used the academic skills but it's required a whole other set of skills that I didn't have. And so creating the growth, the growth that comes from that, the personal growth that comes from that has been really, really enjoyable. But I also, I had this real sense that I wanted to make an impact in some way, and to feel, and to, I think my parents instilled in me very young the social obligation that comes with having privilege and having.
Yeah, I grew up poor, so no one.
Exactly, you're like that's it. I mean, we didn't grow up rich, but we grew up white, so it's you at least you have that. And so they're like, and my dad worked in Harlem inner city schools teaching for many years, and my very disadvantaged kids, and my mother worked in philanthropy for a long time as well, and so this is something that was important to them. And it was important for me to show them to carry that on as well, that part of what we did.
So, okay, so you've launched this because you want to make the world a better place and you want to stretch yourself and gain new experiences and so on. But there's a third reason that you fuss around with entrepreneurial ideas, because you've talked to me about this idea. Do you remember what it is?
No.
Your escape.
Right, escape plan. Right. I was going to say escape, but I was like, that was talking about? I thought maybe that we'd already covered.
So the fascinating thing about you, Adam, is that you have the world's most stable, steady job, and yet you have your eye out for that big thing that makes it the case that you don't need to do that job anymore.
I know.
And is that just simply because you don't love the work enough, or is it just something about you that's like you're not a government worker? Like a lot of academics they're basically government workers. Like they're very what we call prevention focused. They're trying to avoid bad outcomes. Yeah. They seek security and stability. Is it simply that just doesn't resonate enough? Why with the world's safest job do you look for an escape route?
Right.
He's looking away again.
Yeah, I'm thinking. It's right. It's my thinking look. I think I try to, and it kind of goes a little bit back to what I was saying before. You can have the easiest life in the world, but if it's not intrinsically satisfying, then what's the point of continuing doing that? So there's sort of escape into something that ideally would be more intrinsically satisfying, but it'd probably just be another pain in the ass that I'd have to deal with. Of course, sick of. So I kind of get that. I think maybe what I want to do is work with people.
Okay.
And I think, academia is this weird job where everybody kind of hates it. Because either you're an introvert and you're happy to sit in your office and work for hours at a time on your computer, but then you have to stand up in front of hundreds of people and publicly speak all the time. For hours at a time. Yeah. And I'm teaching, next 2 weeks, I'm teaching 8 hours a day, every day for 2 weeks, 10 days. And for some people, that is living hell. Yeah. That would be the worst possible thing they could possibly imagine having to do. And so, but they love the other side of the job. And then if you're super extroverted, right, you don't mind getting up in front of a big group of people, but then you're trapped in your office.
Hours in your office.
By yourself. Yeah. Sitting there writing papers, and it's a very solitary, very lonely existence. And so I think when I say I don't like writing papers, maybe that's what I don't like. And we collaborate, and the emails that I write to you, and when we talk,
we do a lot of Skype calls.
We do Skype calls, and that's great. That's really motivating to me. But it just comes down to sitting down in front of my computer and writing for extended periods of time. I really struggle with that because I'm such a social person.
Yeah, what's interesting is you seek out deadlines. So we have a third collaborator, Caleb Warren, who's been doing the humor work with me from the very beginning, and you regularly are like, you look for a deadline,
right, totally,
in a way that the average academic doesn't. Yeah. Who's trying to avoid a deadline.
Yeah.
So I want to shift gears a little bit and make another observation about it. See, this is what happens when I interview my friend. Right. I have all this inside info.
Right.
So you won this teaching award. Congratulations. And but one of the things that I've noticed about you is you're very good at dealing with bureaucracy. So I think, look, there's an extra level of bureaucracy with Australian academia,
big time.
But I've regularly seen you adeptly and in a very focused way deal with bureaucracy in a way that makes your life better as an academic or in your second life as an entrepreneur.
Right.
So you've funded some of the work through grants.
Yeah.
You get me to come visit.
Yeah.
Even your teaching award came in part because look, you're a very good teacher.
Right.
It's earned.
Right.
However.
Right. But I saw the angles. I know it was going to get what gets rewarded and what doesn't.
But you had to fill out the form. You had to fill out the form.
Right. No, it's true. I mean,
why are you so good at filling out forms?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's a weird one. But I actually think it's actually kind of adept. Where again, like, I look for easy wins.
Okay.
Low-hanging fruit. And one of the things I know about academics is that they hate filling out forms, right? So they will sacrifice all kinds of things to not have to fill out a form. And so that leaves this opportunity for people who are willing to fill out those forms. Not, again, I'm not even talking about arduous forms.
No, yeah.
It's like the teaching award, for example, was like a 2-page. You have to write a little, thing about yourself.
Yeah, of course. A teaching statement, philosophy.
The philosophy of what you do, and some evidence for why you deserve this award. And I don't know how many people filled that out, but I'm guessing not many.
Well, not everybody who was eligible.
Right. Certainly not everybody who's eligible. And partially that's because people don't think that they can.
Sure.
Right. And I have this sort of, I'm willing to give it a shot.
Yes.
Right. I'm willing to ask for anything. And that helps. And I think a lot of people just don't even think to ask for things because they're like, oh, well, I'm not there yet, or I'm not entitled to this, or whatever. And I'm just like, oh, I'm almost certainly entitled to this.
Let me put forth another hypothesis.
Okay.
Is like, it's work.
Yeah.
But it's not writing papers.
But it's not writing papers. It's another way of me avoiding writing papers.
So you're in your office.
Right. I'm like, what can I do right now that wouldn't be writing a paper?
There is, one of my colleagues fussed around with this idea. I don't know what came of it. Is procrastination bad? And the answer is generally yes.
Right.
Of course, procrastination is less bad depending on what you do while you're procrastinating.
Right.
So if you, like my big procrastination, I'm not much of a procrastinator.
Right.
As you might
you're
imagine.
good. You're super tasky.
But I tidy up my house.
Yeah.
When I'm procrastinating.
Yeah.
That's actually not a bad way to procrastinate in the sense that like a tidy house makes me happier and makes my life better.
And the difference is like when I procrastinate, I'd be like looking for a housekeeper online and interviewing lots of different ones, so I got the perfect one. and then that problem would then be solved forever. Right. And then my house would always be tidy.
But you know what I mean, like so versus someone who plays a video game or
absolutely it's
naps
true.
or something. I mean, again,
it's true. I'm actually like I have a desire to be productive, but an inability to be productive in one domain. So it's true. I think I spend an inordinate amount of time getting to know the rules.
And then
exploiting them.
Yeah.
Because I know them.
Well, as someone who has benefited as a research scholar at the University of Melbourne, I thank you for that.
Yeah.
So your family has come up a few times now, and I knew your dad.
Yeah.
So he recently passed.
He did.
So you did the eulogy for him. What did you talk about in that eulogy?
I talked about, and I think this is. And maybe this is a lesson on how to write a eulogy, or a best man speech, is I always look for, I don't want to tell just a story. It's like when you're writing a paper or something like that, you don't want to tell, it's not a narrative. It's not like this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then the surprise ending. It's thematic, right? What are the things that mattered to me? And so I thought about the character strengths, the strengths that I received from him, the path that I feel like got passed on. So I talked about his courage and wisdom and his compassion.
So the wisdom like the you're boring.
Exactly, like wisdom like that. And really wisdom really in terms of just like he really taught me how to be wise, how to think about. And when I think about what wisdom is, I think it's about knowing yourself, understanding how you think about things, how you act, so you can act with purpose, so you can understand interrogate your own sort of beliefs and actions, and he really, that's what he focused on my whole life, was just like helping me to look inwards whenever I acted, to understand that thing. And so at least, if you're not okay with it or you are okay with it, at least you know what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Did you tell a story about this?
Yeah, so I'd tell a story about that. It was basically about how when we were young, I wouldn't get punished, like we didn't get physically punished or even grounded or anything like that. He would just lecture, and they were horrifying. I just hated the lectures, but what they were was they were interrogations, right? Why did you do that? What were you thinking? Why were you thinking that it was okay? What was that? What was behind that? And so what really challenged me is that you have to think, well, why did I do that? What was that? And flip an answer.
There's no getting out of it.
There's no getting out of it.
And you gotta go to your room.
No, it's like don't go home, go to your room and think about what you've done.
Right.
It's like, no, we're going to talk about exactly what you've done, why you've done that thing, and why you think that's okay. And then you start to, over time, you sort of learn about why you do the things that you do instead of just doing those things.
I see.
And that provided, I think, the foundation for me at least be okay with myself and do things that are purposeful. So I've always acted very purposefully in my life, and as a result, I think I've had a fairly straightforward life. I've had a pretty easy
you have a
go.
good life. Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons behind that is I'm like, okay, well, why should I do what am I thinking about doing? Why do I think that would be a good idea? What are the other alternatives? Why do I think those would be a good idea? And then just once I figure out what the purpose of what I'm trying to do is, working towards that in a very fastidious way. So I really thought about just the kinds of themes or the kinds of major things that he bequeathed to me, and then the kinds of examples that I had that for me were the most clear and most. And it's hard because I end up, as a professor, you just always end up in like teaching mode.
Yeah.
And so, I always all of my talks or eulogies or whatever that I've given up, they end up trying to have like a lesson or but I think not a lesson, but they try to simplify a complex problem.
Yeah, I mean, how do you talk about someone's entire life?
Exactly. Yeah. That's it. And it's a tricky one. And so, but also, how do you make it both interesting as well as true? How do you make it something that people want?
Without making it trite.
Without making it trite, and without making it, and without making it too, it's not for the audience, it's for you. But at the same time, I don't know. I think it's a fine balance of trying to both create the content, delivered. It's like teaching again. It's like delivered in a way that people will be able to accept and understand and embody, but also to make it beautiful, so that people sort of feel it as well as hear it.
I was tasked with the eulogy for my mother's father and my mother's mother.
Right.
And I did it, both of them fairly young. I think I did a very nice job with my grandfather. My grandmother, I have regrets over that eulogy, in part because someone said to me that I left the audience wanting more. So what I did was good, but I could have done better, you know what I mean? And I wish I could do them again, knowing what I know now and having the skills I have now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's you only have one shot.
Yeah, it's an important, like, it's a matter. I think these things matter.
They do matter.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason that we celebrate transitions, and so whether it be marriages and births or, graduations, but also, to me, death is a transition and deserves. And of course, that celebration is more for the audience than for the person.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing is it's really important to have a creative outlet of some kind, so that when the time comes for you to need to express emotional things, you have a way of doing that. And I don't play the guitar, but so poorly. And if you're a musician or if you're an artist or something like that, that's when you're able to express these emotions in some way that it's very hard to articulate. And I think being a writer is really, it's such a gift in these times, because you're able to express the things that are going on inside your head and the things that are happening inside of you in a way that is both true and also beautiful.
Yeah, so I'm working on this new book project.
Right.
So it's no longer a secret.
Oh, it's not a secret. I thought it was a secret. Good.
So, as an aside, one thing that I really like about you, Adam, is you're the only person that I've talked to among my friends who doesn't like the idea. And so, which actually I really appreciate. So when I was circulating, when I was circulating the one pager for the project, people were like, "Oh, this is great! I would love to read it," and you were just like, "Nah." But and look, you might be. No, I don't want to. You might be right. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it may not pop the way.
No, I've come around. I feel like I think the very first time you told me about it, I was like, I think over time I.
That's fair. So for the listener, I've been giving a talk about this, and now I'm writing the book, and it's basically serious business lessons from the masters of comedy.
Yeah.
So instead of, and this is related to your idea about making jokes and emails to your colleagues, it's not a book about being funny at work, but it's a book about thinking funny. That is, how do you think differently about the world? And if you know anything about business, you know that businesses rewards creative thinking, novel thinking, risk-taking. And my argument is that comedians are at the cutting edge of this. Yeah. So one of the chapters is about writing. And in it, I'm making the point that we tend to think, when we think about writing, we tend to think about communicating ideas. Right? You know, so I'm writing a book and I'm communicating these ideas. Right? Or you make a marketing communication, you're communicating an idea. You're writing a eulogy, you're communicating an idea. And your point about being a creative person makes the ability to communicate better, especially when it's about something emotional, because artists feel an emotion. That's what art is. It's about representing emotion. Yeah, I believe that. Yeah, totally. You know, the best poetry doesn't teach you something about the world, but it makes you feel about the world. The point I make is there's these two other valuable elements to writing that are overlooked. So the first one is record keeping. Is that we should write in order to record ideas. That is that ideas are, like, they flitter away. Totally. Memories flitter away. Yeah. And so writing, having some process of writing down the ideas that you have is worthwhile because you can see them again. Yeah. So, for example, I've started journaling as a result of this. Yeah. And I wish I had been journaling my entire life. Yeah. And
the few journal entries that I've written, I've probably read 100 times.
Yeah, right. So for example, this is the value of record keeping is this. I was looking back through this journal, and I found in 3 different places I wrote the same exact phrase, which is I'm weirdly stressed. So I was stressed out, but I couldn't figure out why I was stressed out. Right. And I remember thinking, like, that's he's writing something down.
No.
I like it. Okay. So that was useful for me, you know what I mean, to be able to notice that that's happening, because then it goes, oh, well, this might be more of a problem than I think it is. Yeah. You know what I mean? If it's there and then it goes away and it's there and it goes away. So the idea of record keeping. The second one is clarification.
Yeah, totally.
And so the act of writing a eulogy, or the act of writing a paper, or the act of just writing a one-pager for this book, it doesn't just take the thing in your head and put it on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
The act of having to articulate that then changes the thing, and my argument is it changes it for the better.
Yeah. I think you feel like you have a great idea, right?
Until you write
it down, and then you're like, actually, to write this down, there's so many missing pieces.
Yeah.
But the idea is, and you really know when you got a great idea, because then it flows onto the paper without any work, or without much translation.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you start writing, it's like, this isn't. But again, the better of a writer you are, the more that you're able to do that crafting process in future, like as you're going.
Indeed.
And I think that's what.
And then, of course, the only way you can become a better writer is to write. Yeah. And so yeah, that's something. So I'm working on that.
So I remember you saying that. I remember that actually stuck with me when we first met. You're like a couple years ago, I wasn't that good of a writer, and so I just sat down and I said, okay, I'm going to just write. I'm just going to write. Writer's right. I'm going to write every day. And you're one of the most disciplined writers I've ever seen.
And I need to be because I'm not that good a writer.
Yeah, no, you're not. But no, but it's incredible. But that's how you do it.
Yeah.
The ability to, and so I think having that, the discipline, and I think with comedians, that's really what probably differentiates the successful one.
Oh, totally.
The unsuccessful one is, you can be funny, but to have the discipline to write it down. And I find it to be the most satisfying thing that I do, but still the thing that I do the least.
Yeah.
So when I actually take an idea and I write it down, or even a thought, or even a journal, or something like that, when it's done, I'm like, God, I'm glad I did that. Oh, it felt so good, it felt so right, but getting started, the process of doing it, really getting because before you start the writing, it feels good in your brain. Yeah, it always new ideas always feel good. Yeah, they feel good and they feel like nice and fluid and it's like, I have this problem with the CEO of our company, my partner, my co-founder, right, is that he's got these ideas in his head, but he used to be this great poet, but now he really struggles to write. And so, he'll be like, so talking about those ideas, I'm like, okay, you need to write this down because you're talking about lots of different things, and they're all good ideas, but until we write this down, it's nothing. I agree. And so, he's like, I don't want it, it feels good, I want it to flow and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but of course you want it to flow. That's what everybody wants, is that flow in your mind. And it doesn't take away from the quality of the ideas, but the usability of the ideas really becomes evident when you put it together. I'm a big one-pager. You have an idea? Write a one-pager. Mm-hmm. And so, if you can't, at the end of it, you have a feel for how strong or weak it is as a result. Yeah. So I want to wrap up, but I do want to say that I really like your dad. Yeah. He's a great guy. He's a great guy. So he was a big caregiver. Your mom died of Alzheimer's. Yeah, basically. And so he was her main caregiver for many, many years. Yeah. And then he had a little bit of this renaissance after her passing, where he kind of got. But then he got sick. Yeah. So he had about 4 months of renaissance, and then he got cancer, and then he got stage 4 lung cancer, and then he beat it. So he beat it, exactly. And he was visiting me in Melbourne. Yeah. And he just wasn't feeling well. He got otherwise in absolutely perfect health, never smoked. And I took him to the hospital there and he had a pulmonary embolism, and then they scan, and they said, it looks like there's no something in the lungs, end up checked out and go home. So he got on the plane, once he recovered from the embolism, went home, and, turns out, they're like, you've got cancer, it's everywhere, you've got a giant grapefruit-sized tumor in your leg, and your shoulder, and you've got about 2 months to live. Yeah. So it was really quite a horrific diagnosis. They put him on one of these targeted therapies, placebo it's called, and without any real negative side effects, the cancer basically disappeared. Yeah, incredible. And 8 months later, we were in Antarctica together. Yeah, I know. Waiting to see a penguin as we jumped onto the shores, and we did it with Africa, and then he came back from Africa with my brother. He went to safari with my brother, came back a week later and had a stroke, a very significant one. And then a year ago, and again, his cancer had come back. But he had a stroke, it looked again really dire. Again, beat the stroke, beat the brain damage, and then he came back then. He came back from that cancer the second time. Came out to Australia by himself a couple months ago, and met his granddaughter, my daughter, for the first time, and then he just recently passed away. But after quite a 2.5 years of really good quality life. Yeah, fascinating just seeing him kind of thrive again. Yeah, incredible. I mean, incredible to watch somebody be so resilient in the face of the most terrible things. Like, your wife, 50 years dies of Alzheimer's, and you're given this incredibly terrible diagnosis, and then, consistently able to just sort of come back from what would, I think, be so devastating to people that they would never even think to do what was required to come back. Yeah, yeah, it's really had a big effect on me, thinking about it. Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to that idea, and I think part of what we know about resilience is that you can take much more than you think you can. Yeah. Good things that happen to you are not going to be nearly as good as you think they're going to be, and bad things that happen are probably not going to be as bad as you think they are. Yeah. But part of it takes the resources, being able to be optimistic and see the possibilities of the future and see always good that. And having the social support, and building that up throughout your life so that when it happens, you can draw on that. Yeah. So that he didn't pull away from people. He didn't, when my mom was sick, he didn't just go into seclusion. And so when he got sick, he had friendships and he had relationships and he had the kinds of things that he could draw on that sort of facilitated his recovery as well. So, he was a survivor, and not just a survivor, but somebody who thrived in the face of incredible. It's really amazing. Yeah. On to a lighter question, and the final question. What are you reading, watching, or listening to that's really good? It stands out. Not just run-of-the-mill good, but just is like, wow, that's excellent. That's really good. I just read Barsky. Oh, really? Yeah. Wow. I really enjoyed that. You are a nerd. I know. Why? Why I enjoy it? I don't know. I think I read it out loud to my wife and my daughter while she was, my wife, we just hit 6 months old. And so when she just came home from the hospital. Okay. And I was sort of nursing, and then we were just kind of sitting around a lot. And so I started reading this book, and then I started reading it out loud. And it was just great. It's a wonderfully written story. Have you read it? I don't think so. Yeah, it's just if I did, I was teenage. No, it's good. Okay. I don't know. Oh, yeah, it's been out a month ago. Oh, no. I don't know. I think. And it's the retelling of the Greek and Persian wars, and the gods, and all of the, the battles between Greece and, whatever, Odysseus, and all the things, all the stories, many of the stories, but from the perspective of this sort of minor nymph, Barsky. And so the whole thing is told from her perspective. And it's a really interesting story, a really interesting take on that, and tells a lot of this, and, a lot of the stories you'd be familiar with, but a very different perspective on that, a human perspective on them, and a very female perspective. I see. So I really enjoyed that, so I would recommend that. So that's it. Adam, thank you for saying yes to this one. Yeah, no problem. I've got to go home now, 12:15. I've got to pack, and then I've got to go to Australia with a 6-month-old. So this is literally going to be the highlight of my day. The next 25 hours, the next 36 hours are going to be hell. So I appreciate doing a little something before that. Great. Well, I wish you the best. Well, good night. Cheers.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to visit petermcgraw.org for more information about our guests, show notes, and social media links. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with others. Join Dr. Peter